Welcome everybody to this Just Peace dialogue on standing up to war crimes and also standing up to crimes of war. We're really grateful to everyone that's joined us. And we're very, very grateful in particular to our two guests that will be with us today and that we'll be in dialogue with. Maybe just a little bit of housekeeping before we kick off. So my name is Janet Jobson. I am the CEO of the Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy Foundation, based in Cape Town, a very cold and windy Cape Town today. And I'll be moderating this session. We really do want it to be interactive. So please do, write in the chat. I can see there's some chats already coming. But also if you'd like to ask a question to our panelists, please feel free to write it in the Q&A section. And other participants you'll see will be able to upvote your question so that it is sort of pushed to the top of the queue so that we make sure that we see it. So that's the basic housekeeping for this event. We're really, really pleased that we will have two panelists joining us from Ukraine. Katerina Rashevska is a legal officer at the Regional Center for Human Rights and has been particularly involved in the question of the illegal deportation of children from Ukraine to Russia. And we'll also be joined by Andriana Susak-Arektka. I will hopefully get my pronunciations better. We're just waiting for her to connect. She's currently in a bomb shelter, just to bring the reality of the war to us. It's a particularly apt time to be having this discussion about a just peace. As we all know, today is the start of the BRICS summit, which is bringing together both the heads of state of the BRICS countries, although Vladimir Putin virtually, as well as many other heads of state, particularly from the African continent. So the eyes of the world really are on South Africa at the moment. And it was very interesting listening to Ramaphosa's foreign policy statement yesterday, which really three things stood out to me. One, the emphasis that our foreign policy was rooted in human rights. The second, that we're rooted in an understanding that all conflict must end through negotiation. And third, there was a recognition for the respect for territorial integrity. And I think it's really important that we do acknowledge where we are seeing the South African foreign policy shift. It was also very interesting to hear just how specifically he called out that non-alignment is not the same as neutrality, and that South Africa would not stand neutral in the face of oppression of other people. Unfortunately, what remains missing is the experience of the Ukrainian people themselves. It was very interesting that the speech spoke about standing up to colonial oppression in Western Sahara, in Palestine, but didn't also see that the struggle of the Ukrainian people is a struggle against a colonial empire. The Just Peace dialogues are here to bring us stories from Ukrainian voices directly to South Africans about letting us engage with the people of Ukraine, even while governments and geopolitical sort of conflict is happening. It's also a really apt time to have this discussion, not only because it's BRICS, but because the 24th of August is the 18-month anniversary of the invasion of the Russians into Ukraine. And it also is Ukraine's Independence Day, and independence particularly to be understood as independence from a colonial Soviet Union. And I think that's really, really important to acknowledge what an extremely important time we're having this dialogue in. So our two panelists, Katerina, as I said, a legal expert from the Regional Center for Human Rights, and she is one of the co-authors of a submission to the International Criminal Court regarding the illegal deportation of Ukrainian children. So we'll certainly be dealing with that topic today. But then also Andriana Susak-Arektka, who will join us as soon as, there we go. Andriana, lovely to see you.
Thank you. Me too. Sorry for missing because we were in a bomb shelter and I just came in.
No, thank you for joining us. And it brings the reality of the war close to home. So I was just saying, Andriana has a background in marketing and advertising, but went on to then join the military in 2014 when Russia first invaded Crimea. And she's led a movement for women to be recognized in the armed forces, and particularly as combat forces. And so she's joining us straight from Ukraine as well. Maybe just to kick off, it would be wonderful to hear from both of you a little bit about yourselves, a little bit about your own story, and in particular the work that you've been doing in the last 18 months in response to the invasion, the Russian invasion. Andriana, should we kick off with you maybe?
I can. Hello to everyone. Nice to be with you. I am Andriana. Now I'm an active servicewoman. In 2014, I joined the Armed Forces of Ukraine as a volunteer, but because on that period of time, women were prohibited to be on combat positions. So I was an assault trooper and liberate cities in Luhansk region, but by the documents, I was a seamstress. After demobilization, after coming back, we joining with other women veterans and make an advocacy campaign in an invisible battalion that opened 63 combat positions for women in army. And now women can be on combat position and to join the armed forces, and now they are defending our countries. It was in 2018 that government changes the legislation. In 2019, we opened a military lyceum for young girls who wanted to be an officer, because military lyceums they were prohibited for girls, they were just for boys. And as we see, our war is till from 2014. We organized a great movement in Ukraine. Like NGO, Ukrainian Women Veterans Movement, that now this movement accounted like 700 women veterans. They are now volunteers, or they come back to the front line, or they try to change legislation, try to provide human rights, gender equality in army, and I, as a leader of Ukrainian women veteran movements, decided in 2020 to join again as the army, because of school failed invasion of Russian Federations. I'm now on combat position, not a seamstress, but I liberated Kiev region, Kharkiv region. It's different part of Ukraine, and then we moved to the south, and I also took part in liberation of Kherson region. But on the 1st of December, I was injured. I was drived on anti-tank bomb and have a polytraumatic like syndrome. I broke my back, I broke my arm, and so now I'm on rehabilitation, and my rehabilitation is going on, and in 2 months I hope that I will return again to the armed forces of Ukraine.
Sure. Thank you, Andriana, for that. Very, very detailed sketch. It's such the anecdote of being called a seamstress while being on the front lines is, a fascinating sort of insight into the gender dynamics of not just Ukrainian society, but most societies around the world. Katerina, maybe you could just give us a little bit of an introduction to yourself and the work you've been doing in the last 18 months.
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me there. It's a huge opportunity to, first of all, to present the work of our organization, but mostly to do something, to call on your distinguished audience to help us with repatriation of these children, and also with bringing guilty persons to justice. So I am Katerina Rashevska, and I am a legal expert at the Regional Center for Human Rights. My organization has a great history. We were established in 2014 in Sebastopol, but of course, because of the occupation of the Crimean Peninsula, we were first to move to Kiev, and we started to deal exclusively with human rights violation committed by Russians in Crimea. So we were experienced enough in order to be the first to expand the scope of our activity and to deal with war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by Russians since the beginning of the large-scale invasion. Just in bomb shelters during first days of this large-scale invasion, we together with our partners, we created the Ukraine 5am coalition, one of two big coalition in Ukraine who documented war crimes, who provide our partners in the whole world with legal qualification, and of course who are cooperating with victims, because there are thousands of them. My focus of activity is illegal deportation and forcible transfer of children. And now, unfortunately, this scope of activity is expanded because Russians refuse to give our children back, to return them, to allow repatriation of these children. That is why we need to we need to make another effort in order, first of all, to try to create unique mechanism of repatriation and then to bring perpetrators to justice. We are cooperating with the ICC, with other judicial and quasi-judicial bodies. First of all, we are lawyers. We are trying to be independent, to be like professional, and not give our emotions to be like priority. So today, I would like to expose to you the situation like it is, not some propaganda, not some narratives, not something else. I would like to thank once again organizers for such possibility. Thank you.
Katerina, maybe we can just follow up from that and maybe just to ensure that we don't assume that our audience actually knows that much about the deportations. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about, what we sort of know is that the illegal deportation of children is what has been identified as the war crime, that the red notice from the ICC has been issued for Vladimir Putin, and we're very aware that that is why he is not in South Africa at the moment at the BRICS summit. But could you just give us a little bit more context about what's been happening with this illegal deportation? How exactly has it been working?
Yes, sure. So first of all, I would like to emphasize that children are not just small adults. They're individuals with unique character and unique destiny. That is why I don't want to talk to you about numbers today. I know that everybody is interested in numbers and statistics, but I don't want to be a statistician explaining who instrumentalized children and why. I want to tell about children themselves. These are orphans, children deprived of parental care, separated from their families, left in the occupation and transferred for education or medical intervention and non-return. Today I am speaking in front of you, but one of them can be, unfortunately, in a military vehicle, Ural, on the road to 57 regions of the Russian Federation or even to Belarus. We have identified at least 46 institutions in Russia where these children are, and also 8 institutions in Belarus and 8 institutions in Crimea. So the scale of this crime is huge. Russia began illegally deporting and transferring Ukrainian children for adoption not since the beginning of the large-scale invasion. It was in 2014. In some cases, Ukraine managed to stop this flow. However, about 1,000 children were taken from the occupied Crimean Peninsula before the large-scale invasion. And despite of Ukraine demands, it was not involved in any processes related to changing the status of these children. It violated both bilateral treaties ratified by the Russian Federation and, of course, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child and the Geneva Conventions. From February 2022, deportations becomes mass. We know of at least 3 schemes used to displace Ukrainian children. This is so-called evacuation, first of all. It was the most popular option in the first months of the beginning of the large-scale invasion. Then, since summer 2022, Russians invented another option, is the so-called re-education in summer camps. And then in October 2022, another pretext, rehabilitation in medical institutions. Russia transformed the latter into a kind of concentration point where the fate of many children is decided. For example, Russian citizenship is imposed and transfer to a Russian family or boarding school is formalized. We studied the Russian legislation in detail, my organization, to ensure that in order to guarantee the full realization of the rights of Ukrainian children, it was sufficient to amend the laws regulating medical care, social and educational services. Instead, President Putin, at the request of children's ombudsman Maria Lvova-Belova, simplified the imposition of the Russian citizenship on Ukrainian children. The only objective explanation for such a step is the desire of these persons to eradicate the Ukrainian national identity of these children, to assimilate them with Russians, and therefore to destroy an entire generation of the Ukrainian nation. That is why the ICC issued arrest warrants against these persons, not because of the start of the war, not in connection with political differences, but because these persons organized deportation, russified and illegally deprived of the liberty of more than 19,000 Ukrainian children. Among these children are at least 4,000 orphans and children deprived of parental care who are in a highly vulnerable position without any rights of choice, in complete dependence on Russian agents. It should not be forgotten that citizenship, of course, is not only about rights, but also about duties. In particular, to serve in the Russian armed forces and therefore to swear allegiance to a belligerent state, which is a war crime recognized as such in most countries of the world. Contrary to the position of the Russian Federation, its law on citizenship doesn't allow Ukrainian children to have a Russian citizenship, keeping Ukrainian as well. There can be no question of any free choice and consent as long as these children are in captivity under the total control of the Russian Federation. Usually I say, imagine if your children were kidnapped and turned into your enemies. However, today I know that amongst those listening to me, there are representatives of states for whom such a scenario is not a figment of imagination, but unfortunately a cruel past, which we have not condemned enough. Now deportation and eradication of identity are realities unfolding in the very heart of Europe. And Ukraine needs the help of the international community and its experience. We want to return Ukrainian children, however, Russia doesn't give them back. The process of repatriation of Ukrainian children is extremely complicated. Russia deliberately creates obstacles in the form of additional checks at the border, long preventive talks with representatives of law enforcement agencies, and even refusal to hand over the child to a legal representative or for example, parents. Citing the armed conflict or deficiencies in the documents, some parents and legal representatives, they were forced to obtain first the Russian passport and then to reissue documents certifying that these legal representatives are really legal representatives according to Russian law. This is not only violation of Geneva Convention, but it is also some kind of cynicism of the Russian Federation and the sum of mechanism of means in order to impose this citizenship on civilians in occupied territories. A relative of 17 years old Denis was deported from Russia without any explanation and without Denis. 17 years old Bogdan was detained at the border and again forcibly transferred to Russian family. Today I am addressing you with a clear call to help us and to advocate the return of Ukrainian children, because we have the time in order to ensure the accountability. But unfortunately, we don't have this time for repatriation. These children are in a very vulnerable position. Some of them can be in the near future, victims of forcible mobilization. This is war crime. The obligation to repatriate these children is universally recognized. The article of the relevant article of the additional protocol first to the Geneva Conventions was adopted by consensus. And I guess that this is like a clear example of a determination of the international community. Our main idea, the idea elaborated inside the Regional Center for Human Rights and supported by many other non-governmental organizations, not only in Ukraine, but in the whole world, is to, first of all, vote the General Assembly resolution because it can demonstrate to Russia its obligation according to international law, and then to organize the process of signing of internationally binding agreement between Ukraine and Russia through the third-party guarantor, because it's impossible for Ukraine to cooperate with persons who are now suspects in the International Criminal Court. And of course, unfortunately, Russia can repeat the scenario of Budapest Memorandum, where we had the treaty, but unfortunately, the Russian Federation violated it. So I know that all guilty persons will be held accountable. However, leaving children in Russia means continuing to commit this crime. So until the last child's leg crosses the Ukrainian border, we will fight for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Katerina. And yeah, it's just really horrifying to imagine the illegal, the kidnapping of children, essentially. And at least, I think maybe just one thing to reflect on as South Africans is that the African Peace Initiative at least included the return of all children as a fundamental principle on which a just peace must be determined. And I think that is something that we should all be getting behind, that whatever else your position on this war might be, the return of children is fundamental, and we must stand up to the war crime of illegally deported children. Andriana, I'd love to hear from you and really get a sense. I guess the first thing I'm interested in is, so much of what seems to have surprised the world about Ukraine's resistance to this invasion is that it was ordinary people that seem to have signed up and just refused to give in. So I'd love to hear a little bit from you about what made you sign up for the army, and what is your sense of sort of what is the prospect for a negotiated end to the war?
It was not my dream to be on the front line and to fight. I am a mother also. I have a son, and he entered the school first year of a graduation of school, and without mom and without dad, because my husband is also a serviceman. So it was not my future, but the occupants and the Russian Federation make this my future. The war, the crime. I've lost during just 3 months of summer more than 100 friends on the front line. My life is now with PTSD, with trauma, with more dead friends than they are alive. And as 50% of our nations are women, so nobody can say me that my choice is bad for me to protect my country, even legislation. That's why it was my idea. It was my my decision to go to the front line to protect my country, because my dream is my son not to be an army and not to be on a front line, just him. Because, for example, my family story is that my grandmother was for 20 years deportation on Siberia, on Russian Federations. My mother also. So I believe that my son will have better future than all my parents and grandparents and me also. As Russian army is very strong because they have a lot of human resources, because they call their soldiers like human resources. So Ukrainian army needs not only men but also women, and women on the front line can be as professional as a man. And because I am a seamstress, but I am awarded the Courage Medal from General Staff, for example, a seamstress with courage. That's why I believe that like Ukrainians, women and men, it doesn't about gender. It's about that we are fighting for our lives. And if we need to gain our victory, because the situation can be another, that we will not have a country and we will not have a nation at all. So that's why we are defending our country, and that's we are fighting with Russians.
It's such a powerful testament. I think part of the mistake we can make in the rest of the world is to see this war only beginning 18 months ago. And what's clear, certainly in all the conversations I've had with Ukrainians, is there's been this process of oppression under the USSR, then the occupation of Crimea, then the invasion. So while it looks like a brand new war to some of us from outside, I can understand that from within the country, it's a sense of a continuation.
I want to add that I'm in the army from 2014, but before full-scale invasion, before 2022, I had a project. I was a part of one project of peace building, peacemaking concept, and we met with women from occupied territory. It was the first time when I met women from Donetsk and Luhansk, and we were talking in a very calm circle, and it was very hard to understand that these women they are on their homes in Donetsk and Luhansk, but without any rights and without any voices, because they are prisoners at home. But full-scale invasion changed the situation, and now I lose contact with them at all.
Sure. It's in South Africa, August is Women's Month, and it's very apt to be hearing about your work and the particular struggle of women. You know, the common struggles around the world, but the particular struggles in situations of conflict. And I'm seeing on the Q&A that there's quite a lot of interest in the idea of a negotiated peace. And so in part, a question around what do you think of the African Peace Initiative? Another question about whether or not Zelensky is willing to negotiate, or what the terms are that you think Ukraine would be willing to negotiate. I don't know if either of you have an opinion on a negotiated end to this war, and what are the hard lines that you're not willing to compromise on? Where do you think there could be some discussion? Maybe Katerina?
So I will start, and maybe then Adriana can add something. So first of all, we need to understand that every armed conflict is finished by peace negotiation, peace agreement. So without this negotiation process, it's impossible to reach the sustainable peace. That is why I know that Ukrainian civic society, at least, is for negotiation, but we need to understand that the Russian Federation now demand to recognize the annexation of our territories, to recognize the so-called status quo, and to recognize the situation where our Ukrainian citizens were forcibly turned into Russian citizens. So it's impossible. And of course, I know that there is a question about Crimea and other territorial concession. Never. We will never accept any territorial concessions because we know these 8 years of occupation of the Crimean Peninsula and also of the east of Ukraine. And after these 8 years of occupation, we had the large-scale invasion. That is why to leave some territory to the Russian Federation means to leave for them the possibility to carry out another act of aggression. That is why we will never accept territorial concessions, because for us it's really important. For us it's not about territories, it's about people, our Ukrainian people who are now in occupation and who need our help and who need our protection, because they are victims of international crimes and also of some violations of their fundamental rights. The right to identity, to preserve your identity, is like a prerequisite to enjoy other rights, human rights and freedoms. That is why to deprive them of the possibility to be just Ukrainians in these occupied territories is not acceptable for us. I'm not sure that I answered your question, but we are not against negotiation. We are against conditions to start these negotiations.
I just can add that I can't even imagine negotiation with terrorists because they are terrorists. And of course, Donetsk, Luhansk, Crimea is Ukraine. And we have border of independent country from 1991. And in 2 days, we have Independence Day without our cities, because they don't have independence, because they are victims of terror and war. So I even can't imagine about some negotiation, because from 2014 we tried to make a Minsk agreement or other agreement, and it just bring us against like full-scale invasion. Negotiation with Russian Federation means, I think, in future, in 10 years again, full-scale invasion again, because it's country that like live because of war in different parts of the world, not only in Ukraine. They started in Chechnya, in Georgia, in other countries, and now they have a full-scale invasion in Ukraine. That's why not.
So it's interesting to hear the different perspectives of whether to negotiate or not. Katerina, maybe just a sense from you, if and I think rightly so, if territory is not to be negotiated, what would the terms of negotiation be? What are the kinds of things that you think Ukraine could negotiate about?
So first of all, I guess.
Oh, Katerina, we've just lost your voice there. Could you try again?
And now better, yeah. First of all, I guess that the peace formula elaborated by our government is a good one. So the first condition is that the Russian Federation should leave our territory, all territories, or included Crimea and Donbass, because we don't want to negotiate with people who are with arms, with weapons inside Ukraine. It's like to negotiate with terrorists, and you know that the Russian Federation regime is proclaimed as terroristic, at least at the European level. So first of all, they leave our territories, and then we can start the process of like given to Ukraine some guarantees, and not like Budapest Memorandum, but legally binding guarantees. We need people here in Ukraine, in every region of Ukraine, need to know that they are not in danger. But without such a guarantee, we will be victims forever. So first of all, to leave the territory, and then guarantees of security for Ukraine. And of course, the Russian Federation, like any other country, cannot decide whether Ukraine can be member of the European Union or no, or whether Ukraine can be member of NATO or no, because the Russian Federation should respect principles of the United Nations Charter. These principles are equal for all members of the international community. And I guess that if we allow the Russian Federation to violate these principles, every country in this world can do the same. So all the world is in danger.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the rhetoric in South Africa, or certainly our foreign policy position, views this war as one between NATO and Russia. And what is so disheartening about that is that the Ukrainian people don't appear in that perspective. But I guess it would be interesting to hear from you, what is your perspective on countries like South Africa who are claiming to be non-aligned, so therefore not willing to take a stance against Russia, but not for Russia either. What is the role you think countries like South Africa could play, and what do you think are the stands we need to take no matter what, in order to play a useful role in ending this conflict?
So I guess that voices of African states are very important for us. I'm talking about voices in the General Assembly, for example, and of course about diplomatic support in every institutions, because Africa is a great power, and Africa was suffering because of the same actions like Russia commits now in Ukraine. So you have this experience and you can help us. Of course, many African states, they are members of the Rome Statute. So we would like that you just don't violate your obligations under this Rome Statute. And when we have this arrest warrant, you should like to implement them, to implement this decision of the pretrial chamber. But because, you know, this is not about to put Putin or Maria Lvova-Belova in jail. No, it's just to bring them to The Hague and to have the fair trial, where independent judge will decide whether it was evacuation or it was illegal deportation. We have here these questions, and I guess that we need to answer them, because it's not about evacuation. When you evacuate, and when you were trying to evacuate children, you needed to do it under the international humanitarian law. I would like to emphasize that the Russian Federation, not the Russian Federation, but the Russian Empire and then the USSR, was not only like a signature of these conventions, but a driver of these conventions. So they know what are the rules of law. So if you would like to evacuate these children, you need to observe the rules of the Article 78 of the Additional Protocol first. So you need to provide the full list of evacuated children to the Central Tracing Agency of the ICRC. Where is this list? Russian high-ranking officials told they didn't understand which list, but we understand. We need the list of names and surnames of these children evacuated by them. But you know, the problem is not only with identification of these children. First of all, the Russian Federation created conditions in which this evacuation was needed. Then they shuttered humanitarian corridors and didn't guarantee the safety of these humanitarian corridors. Then they didn't discuss with Ukraine where these children were evacuated. And these children needed to be evacuated to Ukraine or at least to other occupied territories, not to Russia. And of course, there is no discussion about transferring them to Russian families, about changing them their citizenship, and about changing them their identity. So it's not about evacuation. It's about international crime. And I would like to tell that it is not even about war crime. It's about genocide. And we need to call this crime by their proper names.
Sure. Yeah, it's a very clear perspective that you're bringing, and I think, in particular, the worry with the abduction of children and the creation of them into Russian citizens. It does feel like, as you say, a genocide, a wiping out of an identity. Maybe Andriana, to turn to you, I think. Unfortunately, Ukraine is no longer on the front pages of our newspapers. It's been 18 months. Could you give us a sense of what is happening in Ukraine? Are people returning from the waves of refugees that we saw at the beginning of the invasion? What is the situation really like? And can you give us any sense of that?
Our hospitals are full of people, injured people, children, not only on the front line or near the front line, not only military hospital, but also civilian hospitals. Because, for example, a few days ago in our city, Russia bombed a theater, and around this theater, 7 people were killed with 6-year-old girls, and I think that more than 50 were injured, and now they are in hospitals. So people wanted to come back from, for example, Poland or European Union, where they are refugees. They wanted to come back with their children to Ukraine, but they can't because we don't have a safe city in Ukraine. Every day we have this bombing, these drones or something like that. So on the east and on the south and also on the north of Ukraine, there are war because it's active combat situation. It's there are soldiers, they are shouting. There are no cities because the first line of war is like the empty cities without any houses because everything is ruined. And there are some people that became victims of this war, like elderly women who need to be evacuated from that territory. That's why, and I also want to add to the previous question that you can empower our voices because we are not on the front pages of newspapers, and you can empower our voices, and that will be enough against Russian propaganda, because Russians spend a lot of money for Russian propaganda on international level, on local level. That's why sometimes they say that in Ukraine there are Nazis or something like that. No, we are just soldiers and just members of our country. We are just Ukrainians who want to protect our country. And if you will be courage, and if you will have this strong voice against Russian crime, against war crime in Ukraine, it will be enough for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. I mean, it sort of makes me very aware of the eyes of the world being on us at the moment with the BRICS summit. And if there were a message we could convey to all of the heads of state meeting at the BRICS summit, most of them African, but many from other parts of the world, and certainly, obviously, Brazil, India, China, and Russia, led by Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister. What should our message to BRICS be about this conflict, and what the pathway to a resolution, to a just peace is?
War is not for men or for women. War is not for human. And if in 21st century we have war with prohibited mine, for example, by Geneva Convention in Ukraine, and this is in the center of Europe. In 21st century, we have the awful war in the center of Europe. But we Ukrainians are just fighting for our lives and lives for our children, because we just want to live in an independent country without war. We rebuild, we will come back our people, we will teach, we will do everything.
And I guess that we need to implement the victim-centric approach to all initiatives. Sorry, Andriana, you
No,
can continue.
we just are fighting for our futures. That's why. Give us.
Yes, and for our people, and for our children, Andriana told it. We need to implement the victim-centric approach in all peace-building initiatives because we are fighting not for some idea, not for our empire, not for some not for some things which are not really values, which are ideas from one person, like in Russia, where people don't really understand for what they are fighting. We are fighting for our future and for future of our children. That is why we need, when we're talking about peace and justice, for example, and accountability, we need to think about people. What is justice for them? Justice is not only, for example, fair compensation, but they need the mechanism of this fair compensation. Justice is also the right to truth, to name crimes committed against these people by their proper titles. Also, I guess that without repatriation of Ukrainian citizens, it's impossible to make the situation like it was before the Russian aggression. So the Russian Federation should allow our Ukrainian citizens to go back home. And of course, our Ukrainian children. Sometimes these children are really without parents and without their legal representatives. They need to be repatriated through diplomatic mechanisms. And maybe this summit or separate countries who participate in it can help us with this process of repatriation. Maybe they can be the third-party guarantor. Maybe they can be some mediator in order to organize it. But for me, for a woman who is dealing exclusively with child rights issue, for me, peace without these children is impossible. They are waiting for us, They are in Russia, but they are trying to escape. One boy told me that he is already returned, but he told me that he was ready even to cross the minefield in order to go to Ukraine. So, they would like to be here in Ukraine and not in Russia. And without international support, it's impossible to return them.
Yeah, that's a very powerful call to our leaders, and very, very good is that the African Peace Initiative did include the return of children as one of its 10 conditions. But really, it sounds like that's a top priority in terms of any kind of justice. The two things I've heard from you both is sort of territorial integrity, and then the return of these children that have been deported to Russia. It's very interesting listening to you, both of you, because you speak so powerfully from the front line in this war. And I think for the rest of the world, often, as you say, Katerina, the war can be an idea. It can just be a thing that's happening over there. And what's come through so clearly from both of you is really the reality of the war to the Ukrainian people, the reality of being a country that's been invaded. And I think it's really, really important for us to not lose that perspective in the midst of trying to make sense of the geopolitical machinations between NATO and the US and the West and Russia, that actually at the end of the day, what we're talking about is Ukrainians, Ukrainian children, Ukrainian women, Ukrainian people experiencing an invasion. And that's really come through incredibly powerfully from both of you. I'm just going to quickly check in the questions if there's anything else that we haven't sort of covered in some way. I think we've covered most questions are sort of about the children, about the possibilities of negotiation. There's a real concern coming through around the psychological impact on children of this illegal deportation, and just the challenge of the psychological impact of the removal, and then of the return, possibly to a country where your family has been killed, or where you are now facing a very different reality. I can imagine that that's an incredibly challenging situation.
Yes, it is. First of all, these children were traumatized because of the large-scale invasion, because of conflict. Then they were traumatized because of the illegal deportation. Then they were traumatized because of the forcible transfer to Russian family. And then they were traumatized because when the legal representatives were trying to return them, they faced many obstacles created deliberately by Russians. So they are traumatized, re-traumatized, and for them, not only repatriation, but also, of course, rehabilitation and reintegration sometimes into Ukrainian society is needed. And we are working for it. There are many non-governmental organizations in Ukraine who are ready and who are experienced enough to help these children and to assist them. But of course, we will need in the near future the support by the international community and by the international civic society, because, we are talking about at least 19,000 children. So, and we need to rehabilitate them all and to reintegrate them all. So the support and the assistance will be needed.
Yeah, it's such a large number of children. I mean, it's an astonishing thing to have imagined. I'm very conscious that South Africa's been through its own struggle for freedom, and one of the we're celebrating next year our 30th anniversary of our democracy. And one of the things that was so powerfully pointed out in our struggle for freedom by Archbishop Desmond Tutu was what we call Ubuntu, the interconnectedness of humanity. And one of the things we've really been holding closely to is that the dehumanization or oppression of anyone is the dehumanization and oppression of ourselves, that we should care as much about every single person around the globe and about the oppression and dehumanization that they are experiencing. That's certainly something we've been trying to do through our work with the Ukrainian Association of South Africa, is really to bring the reality of the Ukrainian experience to light in South Africa, so that we don't fall into the trap of just thinking about this as a set of ideas that are being negotiated between big powers, but that this is about everyday people on the ground, women, mothers, children, people volunteering, coming from backgrounds, from marketing and advertising, signing up to go to the front line. And I think it's very, very important that we understand and really support the human stories that are coming out of Ukraine. It's been such a privilege to speak to you both. You really have brought home a sense of both the passion for protecting your people and the passion for really ensuring that we find a way through this as a global community, that we find a way to not give in to sort of the radical idea that it's okay to invade another country, that it's okay to kidnap children. Just in our last few minutes, I wonder if you'd like to say some final words to our audience. We've got people joining from all over the world, as well as mainly from South Africa, and really to get a sense from you of what it is we should be thinking about, what it is we can be doing in our small ways wherever we are, to support and stand in solidarity with the people of Ukraine.
So maybe I can start, because unfortunately I should leave now. First of all, thank you for your interest and for your support, because we need your voices, we need your covering of all these events, and we need this constantly, not only today, but also in future, because unfortunately this war will not end today. And we will need your assistance every day, and not only before the signing some peace agreement, but even after, because Russia for us is like a permanent danger. So thank you for your interest and for this possibility to speak up for our children and to speak up for their return. And I am sure that with such a civic society in the whole world, we will win in this war, because we have such a support. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Katerina. Andriana, any last words?
I also want to thank you and to add, Katerina, thank you for supporting us, and thank you for your future courage and supporting that you will express me through newspaper, news media, and so on, because we need this. Because I think that the truth is the value of this world, and only the truth can stand against terrorism and others. And also, as in our army, we say that people are the main value of Ukraine. So thank you for supporting our value.
Thank you both for joining us. It's been really, really powerful to get a sense of things from the front line. Maybe just to echo that call out to everyone that's joined us today, and everyone that might be watching this after the fact, that there is always something people can do. And we experienced that in South Africa with the global anti-apartheid movement, that it was citizens of countries all over the world who took to the streets, who boycotted products, and who stood in solidarity with the people of South Africa in the midst of a crime against humanity. And similarly, I think even in a time in which there may be grand politics happening, there is something incredibly straightforward and simple about understanding that this is a war that is impacting the people of Ukraine, and that we can stand in solidarity with the people of Ukraine wherever we are, and no matter what geopolitical position our government may take. I've just seen that Zvinka from the Ukrainian Association has posted in the chat that on Friday, if you're in Joburg, there will be a dance performance and a panel discussion also about the war and giving another perspective from Ukraine. We really are trying to build a series of conversations and opportunities for engagement between South Africans and Ukrainians, so that we can really put humanity at the center of everything that we do in regard to this war. And we hope that by doing that, we can strengthen South African government and African government's positions, particularly in the peace initiative, to really take a clear stance in support of human beings, and a clear stance against violence. So thank you everybody for joining us. We've just popped a link into the chat for the event on Friday. I hope we see some of you there. A very particular thanks to you, Andriana, and to Katerina.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful afternoon.